carbohydrates, right? It's the macronutrient that has been villainized in North America for the past 10 years. And now you see the reemergence of things like ketosis, extremely low carb diets and things like that. And the objective of my video today is to not, poop on any other type of diets or any other methodologies rather. But instead it is to educate you guys on what are carbohydrates, why they are essential to life, and then how you need to navigate carbohydrates in your diet specific to your body type and your goal. All right, guys, so before we get too far into talking about dietary carbohydrates, let's first understand what a carbohydrate is. So a carbohydrate is an organic molecule, which means it contains carbon. And in this instance, carbohydrates are a combination of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules put together in a fashion something like this. This is a two-dimensional drawing of glucose, which is a single sugar molecule. Now, the end product of carbohydrate digestion is what we call a monosaccharide or a single sugar carbohydrate. Some of those you're more familiar with, that could be glucose and things like fructose as well. So most of your dietary carbohydrates come from sources like sugar, starches, and fibers. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the rate at which sugar is released into the bloodstream is dependent on the rate of digestion, which is good to know because there's certain times where you don't want a steady spike or a drastic spike in blood sugar like right before bed. Rather, you want things that are slowly digested so you have a steady flow of blood sugar and thus a steady flow of insulin release as well. So now we're going to get down to the meat and potatoes, right? Let's talk about carbohydrates in your diet. First, a serving of carbohydrates is 1 cup of raw vegetables, right? Or chopped fruit, or 1 cup of green leafy vegetables, okay? So let's start off by understanding what a serving of carbohydrates actually is. Now, there's 3 different categories of carbohydrates I've listed here. We have your fiber-rich, we have your whole starchy, and then we have your refined or your sugary carbohydrates, right? So basically, the fiber-rich you want to eat with every meal. The starchy whole foods you want to have like 2 to 3 hours post-workout. And then, these refined and simple sugars, you want to keep the post-workout or just very sparingly, right? So when you're coming up here, right, you're talking about things like broccoli, kale, spinach, cabbage, any type of celery, legumes, beans, things like that, okay? When you're coming down here to your whole food starchies, right? These are your whole grains, right? Your breads, your pastas, corn, potatoes, quinoa, and rice, okay? And then last but not least is the things that we want to keep to only post-workout or, not at all, right? These are things like desserts, fruit juices, processed foods, things that are packaged in cans, frozen, sodas, sports drinks, and nutrition bars, okay? So basically, once again, depending on what your goals are, you're going to want to keep the green leafy vegetables and fruits to every meal, right? Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Basically, your starchy carbohydrates, right? That's your oatmeal, that's your cereals, breads, pastas, rice, potatoes. Those only come after vigorous exercise, okay? And then your last ones, these are the ones you want to keep to a bare minimum, specifically post-workout, or not at all, right? And so those are things like your desserts, your fruit juices, sports drinks, things like that. All right, now for the fun stuff, right? Putting it all together into 4 actionable steps that'll help you guys with fat loss, right? So if you're looking to tighten up your stomach, tighten up the thighs and the butt area, then you need to focus on these 4 steps, specifically with carbohydrate intake. Guys, the first one is to keep all those, processed sugars and sugary treats to a bare minimum. If you're going to do it at all, make sure it's post-workout so your body will partition the carbohydrates to the muscles and not to fat cells, right? The second thing is to keep the whole foods, even though they're starchy, to just post-workout, right? Here's what you need to know. The leaner you are, the more carb tolerant you are, right? So let's say, Coach Jeff, I'm 8-9% body fat. For me, I can eat carbs for like breakfast, lunch, and post-workout, and my body composition stays just fine. But if you're overweight, the more overweight you are, the less carb tolerant you are. So like breakfast would be like protein, produce, and some fat. but you wouldn't want starchy carbohydrates. You want to keep that to post vigorous exercise, because that's when your muscles and your body are more sensitive to sugar and insulin. So sugar will get partitioned back to the muscle tissue, and you won't use a lot of insulin, okay? The higher the insulin and sugar levels in your blood, the more likely you are to store body fat and have a hard time losing body fat, okay? Number 3, guys, is to eat fruits and veggies at every meal with about a 5-to-1 ratio, okay? So if you take the serving down here, right? So let's say you're eating, 5.5 cups of, or let's just make it easy, right? Let's say you're eating 5 cups of vegetables. That means that's 1 cup of fruit, okay? So that's the ratio that you're gonna stick to, right? And for those that need quantification, okay, basically your total caloric intake, only 25 to 30% of those calories need to come from carbohydrates, right? So if you're going to do, some basic math, let's say, you're eating 2,000 calories a day, you just multiply that by 30%. That's your total calories you get each day from carbohydrates. To break that down into grams, you just divide it by 4. That will give you the amount of grams that you should eat each day coming from carbohydrates. And then to know how much you need per meal, you just divide that number by the number of meals you eat each day. And now you can build the perfect diet to losing body fat. Hey, if you're still struggling with your carbohydrate intake and you need more guidance, you need a meal plan, you need more structure, then hey, comment below. Say, hey, Coach Jeff, I need more help with my meal plan. Can you help me out? And I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. All right, I hope this proved very beneficial for everybody out there. Please like, comment, and share.